welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli, that's Bud Elliott, that's Danny Kanell. I'm Chip Patterson, coming to you live at CBS Sports Network and fired up to bring you a big-time breakdown of what's ahead Week 7 in the Big Ten. It is a top 10 matchup that we've got in Eugene, which is the big-time on CBS game. Indiana traveling out to Autzen Stadium to take on the Oregon Ducks. But we are also going to give you a big game breakdown going inside Ohio State, visiting Champaign to take on Illinois, and Michigan goes out west to take on USC. But before we get to those three games, we just want to spotlight one team because we don't need to do a full instant analysis of what went wrong for Penn State because, gentlemen, I think it's almost everything. So the real question is, over the course of this season, what has gone wrong for Penn State? Danny Kanell, where do we start with trying to diagnose how we go from Penn State, Big Ten preseason favorite, number 2 in the AP poll, now unranked in the AP top 25 poll, and really facing an uphill battle to be able to accomplish their biggest goals this season?
How dare we be wrong in the media about a team? How dare we think they're going to be one of the best teams in the country and we fall short of those expectations? It is one of the more inexplicable situations out there in college football. Like Clemson and Penn State, they're two in the same almost because they had veteran quarterbacks returning, new defensive coordinators, a lot of pieces of the puzzle where you feel really good about them, and then they fall short. So I think it's a couple things. One, I think it's the parity is here that has arrived that we've seen on the massive scale like it's never been before. So like the margin for your greatness, your ability to be one of those top teams is less than it was, say, 10 years ago, where if you had all those returning pieces, you would have been more of a sure thing to go there. I also think there's been poor player development. Drew Aller was supposed to take that next step, and he hasn't yet. And you can't put it all over him because at some point the defense has to take a blame. They gave up 24 points in that first half against UCLA as well. So, and it was sort of this perfect storm. It's after an emotional loss. They travel to the West Coast, and it's not an excuse because UCLA is not a really good football team. But I am one trying to tell Penn State fans, do not panic yet. Do not jump off the ship yet. Let's see how things play out. Northwestern at Iowa, and then you have the game against Ohio State where you could save your season. Do I feel confident in that? Not very, but that's what I'm preaching to Penn State fans.
Tom?
Jump off the ship. It's done. I mean, you can't lose to UCLA on the road and think that this team is going to recover enough to get back to the college football playoff or to really compete for the Big Ten title. They have to go on the road to face Ohio State. Sure, you can pretend you've got a chance to win that game, but you've never shown us anything to prove that you can actually win that game. Then you've got Indiana the following week, and for all we know, Indiana's a better team than Penn State right now based on what we've seen. But I do agree with Danny as far as what's really gone wrong. Like just looking past the UCLA game and trying to dissect what happened there, I think if you look at the program as a whole, we just overvalued experience. We thought about everything that Penn State had coming back. We were too, dismissive of the fact they lost their best player on offense. They lost their best player on defense. And we just assumed Drew Aller was going to take a leap forward, despite the fact that Drew Aller hadn't really shown any kind of progress in his career since his freshman season on through. We just kind of assumed it was going to happen, and it hasn't. And this is still a very good team. It's just not the kind of team that's going to compete for national titles. It can hang and beat the teams it's supposed to, although that didn't happen last week. But when it comes to comparing against elite competition, it just hasn't been there. And yes, it won 2 playoff games last year, but they won against Boise State and SMU. As soon as they got to the semis and faced another elite team in Notre Dame, they lost, which is what they've always done. It's what they did to Oregon a few weeks ago. It's what they'll do against Ohio State, and it's probably what they'll do against Indiana. They're not getting to the playoff. I don't know where this means they go forward. I don't know if it's any kind of huge statement on James Franklin at Penn State, but as far as 2025, there's nothing left for this team to play for. It's done.
Yeah, which is a really interesting situation for James Franklin. First of all, I think Tom's points he just made are like literally almost every single point I was going to make, dude. So that was a really, really good segment by you there. I'm running to my head like what's left that I was going to say that Tom didn't just absolutely brain dump on the CBS Sports Network airways. That was phenomenal. One of James Franklin's best traits has been that he always gets his teams up to play. That UCLA game, that's probably the reason why that is the most shocking, because he just never ever does that. The Penn State does not no-show games in which it should win. And so now, the real question becomes, can he get them back on the rails to finish with a decent season, a season that is just merely somewhat below expectation, not wildly below expectation as it is trending to do so right now when you lose to that UCLA team. I think they have a lot of very good players on this team. I think they lack maybe the super elite top half of the first round type game breaker. If you look at the receivers they took in the transfer portal, they don't have a PFF grade on a receiver above a 70, guys. And you're not going to replace Tyler Warren's production if you don't have a guy you can consistently throw the football to, who you can count on, you can just kind of blindly throw at, like they had last year with a Tyler Warren. We had some hopes in the preseason that maybe that's Hudson, maybe that's Pena, maybe that's just this offense looking better in the second year under coordinator Andy Kotelnicki, but it just really hasn't happened. And it is quite disappointing. You would think we could value experience, and clearly, like Tom said, we probably overvalued it.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because there is no bottom out season. They went 4-5 in the COVID year, but we remember what that was like in the Big Ten. Very, very disjointed. But 7-6 year one, 7-6 year two. That's James Franklin kind of getting the program out of the darkness. And it has been one of the great models of consistency in the college football playoff era. If we could get the schedule back on the screen, Bud, I want to toss this back to you. Let's play a little. What does this look like? Because I heard the argument that with games against Ohio State and with games against Indiana, that if Penn State were to run the table, they might have a better playoff resume than they've ever had. Now, I don't know if we believe that given everything we've seen on the field. What do you think is a realistic outcome for the rest of the season for Penn State?
I think if you salvage this and you go 9-3, then most Penn State fans should be fairly happy about that. But I think your chances of running the table here are 10%, 15%, and you really just don't know. Again, can James Franklin get this team off the mat? Can he actually convince them they still have something to play for? We saw a reporter ask Drew Aller, "Hey, do you still feel like you're in the playoff race?" And he responded back, "What do you think?" And the guy said, "I don't know." And he said, "Yes." And for him, it sounded like of course we're still in the playoff race, bro, type of answer. But I don't know if everybody in that room believes that. Are you going to get that effort every week to avoid another letdown? And are you going to be able to somehow slay the dragon that is Ohio State that they have so often lost to under James Franklin, unfortunately?
Can we just remember something real quick, because this is kind of driving me nuts, because you can't lose to UCLA. That means your season is done. Last year, and that was a 24-point line, right? They lost as a 24-point favorite just a year ago. And you said on the road. At home, Notre Dame was a 28.5-point favorite and lost to an Northern Illinois team that finished 7-5. We saw Ohio State lose to a Michigan team that was one of the most average Michigan teams we've seen. And both those teams we wrote off, oh my gosh, those teams, they can't be that good. They both rebounded and made it all the way to the national championship game. Penn State has to take on a mentality that Ohio State did and that Notre Dame did. They've got to sort of come out and say it's us against the world. If they could embrace this and take this criticism and turn it into something positive, maybe they could do something they've never done before under James Franklin. If they don't and this season sours, then yeah, they're probably going to be 7-5. But I think we're forgetting that just a couple weeks ago, they were in overtime with a team we all think might be the best team in the country against Oregon.
My cynicism, Danny.
I don't think those are similar situations at all. Yeah, Notre Dame lost as a huge favorite last year, but that was the only loss they suffered all season long. This is Penn State's second loss in a row, and they've still got to play Ohio State. But they've still got to play Ohio State and Indiana. And also, you mentioned that Northern Illinois team finished 7-5. That win UCLA picked up last week might be its only win this season. They might finish 1-11. I do not think it's the same. I mean, Notre Dame and Ohio State are better teams than Penn State. They were last year. They are this year. Penn State losing to UCLA as a 4-touchdown favorite on the road. They're done. There is no chance they're coming back from it. The fact they lost to Oregon in double overtime, and that letdown hung for them for the next week to cause them to lose to UCLA. James Franklin even said he felt like his team just didn't recover from the Oregon loss. How are we supposed to believe they're going to recover from this? I don't think they will.
I saw Notre Dame, before they lost to Northern Illinois, go into Kyle Field and manhandle Texas A&M. That was like a check mark. Ohio State had stacked up a bunch of wins. They had a loss, obviously, but they had stacked up a bunch of evidence that said, hey, this team has a ceiling. And unfortunately, the only sliver that I've got for Penn State is when they're down 17-3, backs against the wall, and then furiously charge back in there to force double overtime. The rest of the sample set for the 5 games that we've seen Penn State this season, like if we're only to flush out everything from before, the 5-game sample set from this season just does not inspire confidence that they're going to run the table. But hey, Northwestern on deck. 1-0. That's what James Franklin is saying. 1-0 mentality. Here come the Wildcats. All right. We'll turn our attention into that massive game. So coming up on the other side, Indiana traveling out to Eugene to take on Oregon. We are going to take you inside the matchup with the big game breakdown and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network, getting you set for just like an absolutely loaded Week 7. We picked some of our favorite games to give you the big game breakdown, and there is none other than a big time on CBS. Heading out to Eugene, Autzen Stadium, as Oregon welcomes a visit from Curt Cignetti and the Indiana Hoosiers. There are a lot of different angles to this game that we want to get to here in this breakdown. Bud Elliott, I'm going to let you get first word. Where will this game be decided as these two top 10 teams are matched up against each other?
I mean, this is the quarterback matchup of the year, right? Like, these are the two guys who are being mocked at the top of all the mock drafts right now. Fernando Mendoza for Indiana, Dante Moore for Oregon. And they're actually, in some ways, very similar quarterbacks, man. These guys see it, and they don't wait. Like, they really see the field well. They get the ball out quickly. They get a lot of yards after the catch. They deliver a nice catchable ball. They can drive the ball to most of the parts of the field. You see here on our screen comparison, numbers are really similar. These guys are incredibly hard to stop, man. I am super excited to watch this. They're just so good, and they play such a clean game. It looks like you're watching two pros when they play. And like, Dante Moore could not have been more impressive there going into Happy Valley against what is still a pretty damn good Penn State defense and doing what he did in kind of his first major road start since he started for UCLA at Utah.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, these have been two of the best offenses in the country so far this season, and their quarterbacks are big reasons why. They're explosive. They finish their drives. They take care of the football. They rarely go 3 and out, so they're always giving their defense time to, catch their breath and get ready for the next drive. And I think that that's going to be a very interesting thing and a great matchup just to watch. But the one matchup in particular that I want to watch in this game will be Oregon's offensive line versus the Indiana defensive line. Because if we go back to that Penn State game, if you've watched all season long, like, Oregon's clearly doing a running back by committee. They don't know who their best running back is yet. Dan Lanning isn't picking a guy. They're just kind of going with the hot hand. And I think part of the problem that they've had is in the run game, I don't feel like their offensive line has been nearly as strong as it has been in pass protection. But we saw last week, shock of all shocks, against a really good Penn State defense in their last game. It was probably their offensive line's worst performance of the season. We saw Dante Moore being pressured far more often than we'd seen it happen in any of the other games. And this is an Indiana defensive line who a few weeks ago completely overwhelmed Illinois' offensive line. So can we see that kind of performance for them again to put Dante Moore into tough positions? Because I do think that from front to back, this is a very good Indiana defense. But D'Angelo Pons in the secondary, I think, is very good. Outside of him, I think they're gettable. And D'Angelo Pons is expected to be back and healthy and playing in this game. He did not play against Iowa last week, and thankfully Iowa's passing game stinks. league, so it didn't really hurt Indiana all that much. But I just feel like that if Indiana can get pressure on Moore and maybe force him to make him uncomfortable, make some mistakes, the Hoosiers have a shot to pull off the upset here.
If Penn State in a whiteout couldn't make Dante Moore uncomfortable, I have my doubts that Indiana can do that at Autzen, where you have crowd control. You know, you're going to have a much more calm environment. Now, granted, they could do that with pressures. They could have more success getting home, but he was really good. I'll ask you guys a question because I was thinking this out loud. Who do you trust more in this game out of the quarterbacks, Dante Moore or Fernando Mendoza?
Dante Moore.
Dante.
Same.
Dante, because he's at home.
Right, because he's at home. I also think he might just be better. He looks special. And Fernando Mendoza was on the road one time at Iowa. Their numbers came, drastically down. He didn't exactly light them up. Did have an interception in that game. So I'm kind of curious to see how Mendoza handles a road environment that is going to be similar to what he faced against Iowa with better personnel on the other side of the field too.
Danny, tell me is this something or is this nothing? So last year, Indiana played two ranked teams, lost both those games. Now, they picked up a ranked win against Illinois earlier, and it was by an extremely large margin. Is it fair? Is it something or is it nothing? Indiana, when they take a step up in competition, the performance might be a little bit different.
Yeah, I think it's still a fair critique. And that's unfortunately the brand bias that comes into play. Like if this was any other team, a Penn State who had put up that time, we'd be raving about them as a national championship contender. But because Indiana is new to this neighborhood, they kind of have to prove it and stay around a little bit longer. So I do think it is a worthy criticism question for Indiana. How do you stack up against the very elite teams in college football? And this will be a great opportunity for them to prove that they belong.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to be the Indiana hater here, but when they played real bodies last year, they lost, right? And if Penn State had done what Indiana had done to Illinois, we'd say, why is James Franklin being a jerk and running up the score and continue to throw the ball late in the game to make this look even bigger when Illinois was without 4 of its 5 starters in the secondary? Like Indiana's a damn good football team, but they do not recruit at the level that an Oregon or an Ohio State recruits at. And so it's a valid criticism to say, hey, we don't know how they're going to stack up when they play real pro bodies this year. They haven't faced them yet, right? Now, Illinois has a couple, but ultimately they were so thin on the back end. And again, playing 4 or 5 backups at one point in the secondary that we don't know how Indiana is really going to look against a team that has real athletes on defense. Obviously, Iowa's defense is somewhat down this year, and Indiana was kind of pedestrian against them there. I do think Mendoza is the goods. I think like the way he sees the field, his decision-making, he does have a good arm, the ball's out quick. That can help to mitigate some of this. But yeah, like that's a very valid criticism. Indiana is a very good football team. I haven't seen anything to say that they're a great football team or they can hang with the teams that have big-time athletes who are also really well coached and clicking this year.
Yeah, this is the kind of win, if Indiana gets it, you can't move the goalposts, which is what has happened to Indiana the last 2 years. Like, last year, we didn't know if they were any good. They went to that Nebraska game. It's like, all right, this is the first real test. They crushed Nebraska, and then the response is, well, it's because Nebraska stinks. And this year, they go out, they play Illinois, a team that was ranked in the top 10 at the time, beat them by 53, and it's like, well, actually, it's because Illinois kind of stinks. They're really not a top 10 team. If Indiana goes on the road and beats Oregon, you can't say it's because Oregon stinks, because we all know what Oregon truly is. So I do feel like this is really an excellent litmus test for who the Hoosiers are. And I personally think that this is a very good team because, Bud, to your point, they don't recruit 4 and 5 stars. They are not a blue chip ratio team. But the guys that they have brought in through the transfer portal under Kurt Signetti, who are all now juniors and seniors, are very developed. They are very experienced, and they are talented. You can argue that bringing in a good G5 player through the transfer portal is kind of like getting a 4 or a 5-star high school recruit at that point. It's what you're hoping they turn into. So I do think talent-wise, there's clearly a gap between what Oregon and Indiana have. But I don't think it's that wide. Not this year. I feel like if there's a time for Indiana to show us that they're actually worthy of being included at this level of team and discussed with these level of teams, this is a game to do so. That doesn't mean they have to win the game. But if they go on the road and they're competitive at Autzen Stadium against the Oregon Ducks, I think it tells you a lot about who they are.
What does it take to win, Tom? Like, what if we're sitting here with Oregon as we're obviously praising Oregon. We're trying to make sure that we've got context for the Indiana analysis. So what does an Indiana win look like if they are to go into Eugene and come out with a victory?
Turnovers. Get them. I mean, you're going to have to pressure Dante Moore. You're going to have to get him to make a few mistakes. You're going to have to take advantage of him if he does. And if you're Fernando Mendoza, live up to that NFL potential that you have, the kind that has you going in the early first round of mock drafts, because you've certainly got the body size, you've certainly got the arm, and you have shown the flashes of it. But these are the games that if you play well in, that's when the NFL scouts notice. If he goes on the road and he gets, he moves the ball around, he picks this Oregon defense apart, he stands in the pocket and takes hits like the one he took against Iowa a few weeks ago, where he took a shot right to the jaw and waited for his guy to come open and just threw an absolute dart. If he's able to do that on the road against Oregon, Indiana can win this game.
I think they have to do a really good job of exploiting the linebackers for Oregon, right? To me, that's we really didn't see Penn State do that, exploit them in coverage. That's not really something Drew Aller does very well. And that's something I think Indiana really could do because of how quickly Mendoza gets the ball out. So that's what I want to look for here.
Turnovers and big plays. Think about how Penn State got back in the game against Oregon. They hit the big touchdown pass to Devontae Ross. Indiana's shown some firepower to hit those big plays. Granted, a lot of it was against Illinois when they did have a lot of those players out. But I don't envision Indiana lining up and taking those long, sustained drives. Sure, they might have one or two, but I do think hitting on those big plays is one way to neutralize some of that talent gap, take the crowd out of the game, and then forcing turnovers, another great way. They've got to get an interception, a fumble, something. They've got to force the issue and have Oregon, they have to win the turnover battle.
Well, it is going to be 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:30 local, out from Autzen Stadium in Eugene, where they just stand and yell just the whole time. Just a loud, aggressive yell. And it will be quite the environment. We are very excited to bring it to you. You can watch it on CBS. You can stream it on Paramount Plus. It is big time. Top 10 matchup, Indiana out at Oregon. And coming up on the other side, number one team in the country hits the road again. Went pretty well last time. Will it again as they take on Illinois? All that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network, turning our attention to Champaign, Illinois, where the number one team in the country, the Ohio State Buckeyes, will arrive into town, and they will try to avoid what happened to USC before them, going into Illinois, coming out with a loss. Now, this Ohio State team does seem to be stacking success on success. The 42-3 winner from last weekend against Minnesota at home. And so, Tom, I want to pitch the Ohio State side to you first. What did we learn about the Buckeyes in that win against the Golden Gophers?
Nothing.
Okay.
What we learned is that Minnesota is not nearly good enough to compete with Ohio State. The Buckeyes team that showed up and faced the Gophers last week was just a much better football team, and they played that way. I think we learned far more, honestly, about Ohio State on the road 2 weeks ago against Washington than we did against Minnesota, because if you look at how Ohio State has played this year, outside of that opener against Texas, the road game to Washington was their worst performance of the season. They won comfortably. They won 24-6, but they did not have the explosive nature on offense that we've seen them have in every other game. And while they only allowed 6 points, Washington's offense had 3 red zone possessions in the game. They had to settle for field goals twice, and they turned it over on downs a third time. So Washington was able to move the ball better than those 6 points they scored would have you believe. So now Ohio State's going on the road again this week to face an Illinois offense that's been one of the better offenses, particularly in the passing game, one of the more explosive offenses in the country. So how is that defense going to perform against them? Can the offense, which we saw have its explosive nature taken away by the Washington defense, can they bring that to Champaign against an Illinois defense that hasn't been nearly as good as Washington's has looked so far this year? And that was a Washington defense that was missing a few key starters. So I think what we're learned more, what's been more valuable, was Julian Sayin going on the road in this offense for the second time. They were very very conservative in what they did against Washington. Did they did they give them a little bit of a longer leash this week against a team that's been banged up in the secondary?
Yeah, I think we learned. I think we learned that you really cannot play man coverage against this Ohio State team. And I think like the strategy that Texas and Washington used, which was like kind of dare them to keep it underneath, see if you can win in the red zone. Like that's probably what you need to do and try to play a slow, low variance game. I think like we were reminded that Julian Saint actually can throw the ball deep and that you really cannot cover those two guys on the outside.
Did we learn this Ohio State team might be better than last year's team? Like, it's crazy to even say that, but you look at defensively, statistically, they're better, and they played against better competition early this season, including Texas. Julian Saint is playing more efficiently than Will Howard did last year. I mean, the guy is leading the country in completion percentage through 5 games, not through 3 games, through 5 games. He's at 80% completion percentage. It is phenomenal. We knew about Jeremiah Smith. We thought Kanell Tate would be a pretty good, step up and he'd be able to replace Emeka Egbuka. And I'm not saying he's better because Emeka has been awesome in the NFL. He looks like he's a Rookie of the Year candidate. The defensive pieces that you lost, those were ginormous names, like legacy type names in Ohio State lore. And yet they're playing just as good, if not better, than the team was a year ago. It is crazy, but so far this season, they're off to a stronger start than they were last year. And that is wild considering all the pieces they lost. Coordinators, players, all across the board.
Yeah, Danny, I think that is a very fun position to take, but I cannot get out of my head Ryan Day telling us about load management and telling us about, because they don't have the proven experience this year that they did last year. I think there's probably a little bit more of wanting to make sure that they get out there and that they're trying stuff. And you're not necessarily keeping the restrictor plates on this team because they need to be able to test so the coaching staff and the new coaches that they all know exactly what they have out there. This is it is remarkable the way that they have replaced 14 NFL draft picks, something that we discussed last week in our anatomy of the reload here on CBS Sports Network. But I don't know if I'm ready to say all the way that this year's team is better, but they certainly have shown us that championship caliber a little bit earlier than what we have seen. Speaking of championship caliber, yeah, go ahead.
Can I say something real quick? Because maybe it's in my head because I don't know what site it was, what Bucknut site it was, but they were like, oh, Kanell said that they were afraid to let Julian Saint throw. I never said they were afraid of him or didn't trust him. I felt like they had training wheels on Julian Saint, which was the smart thing to do against Texas. But all of a sudden, they're slowly, when you teach your kid how to ride a bike, like you help them early and then you let them go and you're like, woohoo, way to go, Julian. This past weekend, they finally are starting to let him loose, which is the type of play you're going to need out of him. But rather than risk him early in the season and potentially harming his confidence or having a slower start, and everyone's like, oh, is Julian Saint the guy? They have managed him perfectly so that he's on par and on pace to have this historical season. It's been remarkable, and I think they've taken the perfect approach with a young quarterback who hadn't played before.
His supporting cast is rounding into form. We got to see, Max Clare have a big game. Kanell Tate has a big game. Whether it's Bo Jackson or Peebles or Donaldson, you got a lot of options in the run game. I'm with you, Danny. It is a group that seems to be showing us a finer form earlier in the season than we saw last year. All right, Bud, when we're looking at Luke Altmaier, we already had our Illini Minute with Tom Fornelli on Monday's Cover 3 podcast upon further review. Don't worry, Tom. I'll spoiler alert, Hank Beatty is my all-purpose player on my CBS Sports midseason All-American ballot. You'll be very happy to know that. But when we're looking at Luke Altmaier, yeah, what do you see as being the next steps for him that have allowed for him to be that both statistically and also with our eyes, undeniably one of the best quarterbacks in the entire country and definitely one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten? What do you think has helped unlock this for Altmaier, especially after losing 2 wide receivers to the NFL?
I think it's just his presence and his maturity, right? Experience in the system. This guy has played a lot of college football. He's become more comfortable in every season that he's played. He's a guy who's very accurate. Arm is not huge, but it's decent enough. He generally knows where he's going to go with the ball. I think the real key here is going to be how does he handle pressure? If you look at it, his numbers traditionally have not been all that good when pressured. There is a pretty big delta there. And if I'm Ohio State, I say, hey, with all due respect to our all-purpose player, Hank Beatty, my guys can cover their guys. My extra guys, I don't need coverage. I'm going to come after Luke Altmaier. I'm going to see how he deals with the blitz. I want to see Arvell Reese off the edge. I want to see how he handles some of that pressure. If I'm Ohio State, I'm not just going to sit back there and let Luke throw against zone and take a lot of these short checkdowns against me. I'm going to see if I can light him up and see if my guys can hold up on the outside in coverage. I suspect that they probably can. Ohio State has been so good at changing the picture this year. You have an NFL DC who has a super veteran, super talented secondary, and they can just throw like so much scheme at you. It's really been quite impressive this year.
Yeah, I think another thing that's worth mentioning as far as Luke Altmaier and his performance so far this season, in which he has statistically been one of the better quarterbacks in the country, it's also his third year as a starter under the same offensive coordinator in Barry Lunny. So it's like he knows the offense inside and out. He knows if the defense is in this is where I'm going to go. He's got everything memorized, and it's making things a whole lot easier once the snap is made. But as Bud discussed, Ohio State's defense is a bit of a different animal than anything Illinois has seen, and this is an Illinois offensive line that I feel has struggled for most of the season. They've been better in pass protection the last 2 weeks against USC and Purdue, but I think that has a lot more to do with USC and Purdue than anything else. They really struggled against Indiana, which did a lot of the similar things I expect Ohio State will do, and they struggled against Duke early in the season, which was another defense that likes to throw a lot of different stuff at quarterbacks and give them different looks to try to confuse them pre-snap. I think Ohio State will very much be trying to do the same things, and as Bud mentioned, I think Ohio State is better equipped in the secondary to go one-on-one with Illinois' receivers and try to force them to find the open guy in very little time. But the one thing he has going for him, like I mentioned, is he's been in this offense a long time. If he's going to be able to process it quick and get it out, this is one of the few quarterbacks that you think should have the ability to do so. So it'll be interesting to see how this passing attack looks against Ohio State.
Agreed. I think this is one of those games where you're going to get a little chess match between Luke Altmaier and Matt Patricia. The veteran quarterback who knows where to go with the football quickly. He knows how to get it out of his hands. He won't turn it over, but he has taken a lot of sacks. And that's one thing that I don't know if you can survive this type of game when you're, taking sacks, playing long yardage situations, whether it's 2nd and 14 or 15, then it becomes 3rd and 15 as well. You cannot survive against this Ohio State team when you're playing behind the chains like that. So early on, I think it's going to be really, really clutch that Luke Altmaier either throws the ball away, knows where to get rid of it quickly, but Matt Patricia knows that too. So there's going to be that chess match where we saw so many disguised looks and disguised coverages and zone pressures where you're showing blitz, but you drop back in zone and you're trying to fool Luke Altmaier into throwing maybe a hot route into zone coverage. That's where you create those turnovers. I can't wait to see how it goes down because it was one thing against Arch Manning. His first big start, he was totally confused in that game. Can you confuse Luke Altmaier the same way? Will be a huge key to this game.
Well, as a Luke Altmaier podcast, we, of course, are supporting Luke Altmaier in this efforts against one of the best defenses in the entire country. That'll be in the noon slate. We'll see if the number one team in the country can get in and out of Champaign with a win. And coming up on the other side, we head out west, where Michigan seems to be getting things going under Bryce Underwood, and USC is coming out of an off week looking to bounce back. We'll go inside the matchup, Trojans, Wolverines, and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast live on CBS Sports Network. Just a really good day of Big Ten football, a little afternoon action. Of course, our big time game at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. Then we get to pivot over to the Coliseum, where USC has had a couple weeks to lick its wounds of losing against Illinois. Now they're back in action, but they are facing a Michigan team that is starting to find itself with freshman Bryce Underwood. Now, Danny, as you look from the quarterback perspective, we've got Bryce Underwood, the true freshman, who is slowly but surely trying to put things together. We've also got Jaden Maeva, who through the first couple weeks of the season looked like he could could be one of the best in the country and maybe still has an argument there. Danny, how do you see the quarterback matchup between Maeva and Underwood?
Oh, I clearly think USC needs Jade Maeva to play a better game. They're more quarterback reliant. Their run game is adequate, but we saw against Illinois, it got a little bit exposed somewhat. Going against a more physical team from the Big Ten, I think that'll be more of the situation for USC. That's my big question for them. I think Maeva will play really well. I mean, he made some throws that, yes, while they almost got some of his receivers killed, they were still unbelievable throws that the receiver came down with them. And for Bryce Underwood, it's sort of similar to the way Ohio State was treating Julian Sain, except they still have the training wheels on. Like, they haven't taken him off yet because he's a true freshman. He doesn't have as much experience nor the talent around him that you see at Julian Sain has at Ohio State. But just watching him in person, the way he's composed himself, the way he carries himself in the system, the way they're utilizing him more in the run game, I think he's exactly where you want him as far as progression, taking the steps forward that you would like to see. And the good news is for Michigan, if you win this game and you can find a way to sort of win games while your quarterback is developing, they're going to be a really tough out in November. But this is a huge test for both these teams that I think are in the conversation for that fourth best team in the Big Ten, and we're about to find which one takes a huge step forward in that conversation.
Yeah, I don't think it could be understated how good Maeva has been playing this year. In fact, I think if USC wins that game on the road against Illinois, he's probably the Heisman favorite at the moment because USC is undefeated and he's been putting up incredible numbers. And he had an incredible performance in that game, even though his team lost. And as you mentioned, Danny, he did throw a couple of floaters over the middle that probably had his receivers giving him a stern talking to in the huddle afterwards. But other than that, he's been on point. Mekhi Lemon has really emerged as a terrific receiver for him in that offense. But as far as the other side of this, Bryce Underwood is a player that, to me, we saw him in that road game against Oklahoma, his second career start, his first road start. Didn't look ready for the moment, struggled. The offense as a whole completely struggled, and they didn't get anything going in that game. But we're seeing a kid who, as a freshman, who as he's gaining more and more experience with every single passing week, is getting better week by week. He played well on the road against Nebraska a couple weeks ago in Michigan's 3-point win. And I think last week at home against Wisconsin was his best performance. Maybe not statistically, but just as far as everything pre-snap and post-snap, just going through the process and the procedure, I think he looked fantastic. I think it was his best start of his career to this point. So if we see that kind of progression now going on the road against the USC defense that's been a bit banged up and I don't think is all that strong to begin with, we could see something of a Bryce Underwood coming out party. And if we get it, it's going to be a Michigan victory.
Yeah, I agree with Tom here. I also think like the status of some of these players for USC is going to be really important to monitor. USC does not have tremendous depth. They do have some really nice, high-end guys. We did see that Elijah Page was dressed for practice during the bye week, so I think that's a really important one right there. He, missed the second half of the Michigan State game and didn't play against Illinois. It's one of the best left tackles in the Big Ten. Still not sure on their center. I would hope to get him back. Lane's already back. They have a couple important defensive guys who have been banged up as well. To Tom's point, if some of these guys don't play for USC, I don't think USC should be favored. But if they do have these high-end guys, I totally understand the line here because USC does have a lot of playmaking ability on the outside. With Michigan, it's like you see flashes. I need to see those flashes like actually spark a fire, and like they need to result in like actual touchdowns, not just like, hey, that's a nice play, and then they mess up in the red zone, or like, hey, that's a cool concept. I see what they're trying to do there, and then the guy drops the ball. Like Michigan might need to score in the mid-30s to win this ball game, and I'm not totally sure that it can, but I'm also not sure that it can't. I mean, I think it's certainly in there. Just need to see them kind of go out and prove it against a defense that I definitely think is better than what Nebraska has.
Yeah, we do our best bets as part of our locks episode on Thursday, but let me just turn the temperature up because sounds like we might have a little lock fight coming on this matchup over there on the other side of the screen. We'll see how it's going. But matchup. We're doing best bets later in the week. Bud, tell me if I'm wrong. This is one of those chaos tempo games, right? Like this is two teams that want to handle their business different ways. What are going to be the keys to both either Michigan or USC really being able to impose their will and having the type of game script that they want to play? And if I'm reading this wrong, definitely let me know. But it is not quite oil and water, but it is definitely two teams that want to play different styles of games, right?
Yeah, I think like if USC was playing a team that operates at more of a normal tempo, as opposed to the extremely slow tempo with which Michigan typically operates. Although Michigan's shown a little bit of sugar huddle stuff at times this year. But I do think if they were playing a team that's kind of a more normal tempo, they don't have to play super fast. But given all the different variety of blitzes that Michigan wants to bring under D coordinator Wake Martindale, I definitely think that you want to make it a little bit harder to get some of those variety of blitzes in. You want to get to the line, maybe do some check with me stuff. Just make it a little bit harder to get those calls in. So you're getting kind of more simplified looks, maybe a few less exotic blitz packages from the Wolverines. So I would expect USC to probably crank the tempo here just a little bit.
Yeah, and can they get off the field versus Michigan? That 1-2 punch of Haynes and Marshall will be coming at them. Saw it firsthand in Michigan, in Nebraska, when they were able to run the football, just kept pounding them. Can USC handle that physicality is going to be a massive question they need to answer.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that we'll need to see is can, that USC defensive line hold up against this Michigan offensive line? Because I do think USC's offensive line hasn't been at its best, but it's been injury plagued, as we discussed already. If they're healthy, I think that they'll be okay against the Michigan defense. But from what I've seen of this USC defensive front, I just don't know if they're going to be able to dictate anything as far as what they want. I think Michigan's offense will be able to lean on them, which would then help them dictate the pace and keep that USC offense off the field as much as possible. So I think that's the one area to truly be on the lookout for here.
Yeah, I think that starting fast for USC seems super important. Third down defense, the USC's depth. I mean, when we talk about what is going to happen in the Big Ten, the outside of the very top of the conference, where we've got Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana right now, that this winner probably stays in the race. This loser, it's going to be like taking a little bit of a step back and fighting a much more of an uphill battle to try to be a contender deeper into the season. A lot of fun to be had out in the Coliseum on Saturday night. Well, coming up on the other side, every single week, we like to leave you with one player to watch in the Big Ten. We'll give you all that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast each and every week, we like to leave you with one player to watch this week in the Big Ten. Let's go, Danny, Bud, Tom. Danny, who's your player to watch?
All right, I kind of wanted to go with the coordinator, but I'll go with the quarterback, not Jerry Neuheisel. I'll go with Nico. Nico Iamaleava goes on the road to East Lansing after maybe his best game as a Bruin, pulling off the upset of the season. Just an 8.5-point underdog. They're on the road. 5 total touchdowns last week. Can they keep this thing rolling for the Bruins?
I'm going to go with Oregon's DeCorian Moore. Every time they got in trouble against Penn State, he was there to answer the bell for them. I don't think the other Oregon receivers are they're not bad. They're just not special. DeCorian Moore is special. I know he's a true freshman, but he has just been the absolute, kind of get out of jail free card for this Oregon offense when they have needed it so far this year. Can he keep doing that? Can he keep rising to the occasion and help them bury Indiana at home? We'll see.
This is not a rekindling of the Illini Minute. It's more of an Illini 30 to 45 seconds. But I'm going to go with the man who Chip Patterson had the courage to put on his midseason All-America team as the All-Purpose Player of the Year, because he is the All-Purpose Player of the Year. He will not be hard to find. It's Illinois wide receiver Hank Beatty, who's 5th in the nation in receiving yards, averaging 17.8 per catch. And he's caught touchdowns. He's rushed for touchdowns. He's thrown for touchdowns. And he's returned punts for touchdowns. He does everything. And if Illinois is going to pull off the upset against Ohio State, they'll need him to do a little more this week.
And I'm going to be going to that USC-Illinois game as well. Instead, looking at the other side with the pride of Hutchinson Community College. That's right, Wayman Jordan, one of the finds of the year in terms of new additions in the Big Ten. He has got 537 yards through the first 5 games of the season, pacing 1,000-yard year, and he is going to be so important to bringing the kind of balance that is going to keep Michigan from being able to really pin its ears back and try to chase after Jaden Maeva and force him into those kind of mistakes that can allow Michigan to get in and out of the Coliseum with a win. So Wayman Jordan bringing balance to the Trojans offense, a huge key to USC in terms of being able to get right after the loss against Illinois. Well, if you need to get right If you need to get your mind right for the upcoming week in college football, thanks for hanging out with us here. How about a little more? Because we are live on youtube.com/cover3 every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday at 11 a.m. We are live on Saturday nights at 11:30 p.m. with an instant reaction to all the day's action. And you can get us whenever you are available. All you need to do is scan that QR code on the screen.